Okay, we're back. Detectives and Togas. Was the writing forged or not? Well, let's find out. Scribonus took his time, and finally he spoke. The writing on the wall is by the same hand as the writing on the tablet. Well. Vinicius, who had been so reasonable, was angry once more. "Bring me that Rufus too at once," he growled. "I'll talk to him." He thanked Scribonus for his professional services, took Claudia by the hand, and returned to his house. Scribonus handed the writing tablet to Julius and strolled off. The boys angrily watched him go. "He would mess things up for us," Publius said. "So Rufus lied after all," Mucius murmured. "Yet I would have sworn he was telling the truth." "What's the use now?" Julius said. "The die is cast, and Scribonus has ruined our case. It looks bad for Rufus." "He can still run away," Flavius said. "It's too late for that now," Mucius said, "and he doesn't want to anyway. We'd better go and get him." This time they were not in such a great hurry. Their footsteps lagged, and it took them nearly 15 minutes to reach Praetonus's house. The old white-bearded slave looked pale and troubled as he opened the door for them. "The gods be thanked you have come," he exclaimed. "My mistress has asked about you several times. Go in quickly. Something terrible has happened." Each of the boys felt a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. They were so flustered that they forgot to remove their sandals. They made for the main hall and hesitated uneasily at the entrance. Rays of sunlight fell through the roof opening upon the household altar in the corner, which was adorned with early spring flowers. A cat lay asleep on a couch. The first impression was one of peace and harmony, but then they saw Rufus's mother, Livia, sitting motionless in an armchair close by the wall from which her husband's weapon collection hung. She was in tears, and her favorite slave girls stood around her in dismay. When Livia caught sight of the boys, she sprang to her feet and came toward them. "Rufus has been arrested," she said, struggling to steady her voice. The boys were speechless with horror. "You must help me," Livia pleaded. "You are all his friends, aren't you? You know he has done nothing bad. They say he is guilty of desecrating a temple. I cannot believe that. My son is no hoodlum. About half an hour ago, an army officer and 2 soldiers came to take him to prison. Rufus was in his room, but he must have heard us talking about him because he came out wrapped only in his blanket and asked, 'What's the matter, Mother?' The officer put a hand on his shoulder and said, 'You have insulted our emperor. You are under arrest.' Rufus wrenched away and came running to me, crying, 'I swear I did not do it, Mother.' He was as white as this tunic of mine. He wanted to say more, but the officer shouted at him to be quiet and even threatened him with his sword. They led him away just as he was, without even giving him a chance to get dressed. I was nearly out of my mind. I would have run over after them, but my girls held me back for fear I would be arrested too. My poor boy," she sobbed. It can't be true." The boys looked down at the floor in embarrassment. At last Mucius murmured, "We did not believe it either." Livia gave him a look of gratitude. "They tell me that you were here earlier, shortly before Rufus was arrested. Why was Rufus not in school? What has been going on?" Mucius told her the story, with the other boys filling in his omissions. Livia listened, more and more astonished. "Rufus behaved very foolishly in school," she said sadly. "But Caius also did wrong. He knows how much Rufus thinks of his father. Ever since the news of this unfortunate battle arrived, Rufus has been a changed boy. He is upset about his father, so that his anger at Caius was only natural. But angry or not, he is still not the kind of boy to desecrate a temple. There are plenty of other walls to write on in Minerva Square." "There is one point I do not understand," Livia said. "You told me that the senator wants to see Rufus. Has Senator Vinicius already called on the prefect of the city, or has he not?" "No," Mucius said proudly. "We stopped him from doing that." And yet somebody must have accused Rufus, Livia said. Don't you see? Here was a startling thought. If the senator had not yet filed charges against Rufus, who was responsible for the arrest? We are the only ones who know it is Rufus's handwriting, Julius said thoughtfully. I mean, just us and the senator and Claudia and Caius. And Scribonus, Mucius said. But no, Rufus was already arrested by the time Scribonus heard the story. Perhaps Caius denounced him, Publius suggested. Impossible, the others exclaimed. Why not? Publius asked. Caius was pretty mad. That's silly, Julius pointed out. Caius knew his father was going to file charges against Rufus. Even supposing he wanted Rufus punished, he couldn't have planned it any better. His father, the famous senator, going to the prefect personally. Besides, the prefect would never arrest someone just on Caius's say-so. This last point convinced the others. Perhaps it was Vinicius's secretary, or old Herodotus, Caius's tutor, Flavius said. They also knew about Rufus. Julius had an answer for that, too. They are slaves, he pointed out, and slaves cannot bear witness against a Roman citizen. Besides, they would never have dared to act without their master's knowledge. But it must have been someone, Mucius exclaimed, baffled. Simple enough. Someone saw him doing it, Publius said calmly. Saw whom doing it? Julius asked, desperately making signs to Publius to keep quiet. But Publius did not understand. Someone saw Rufus writing Caius is a dumbbell on the temple wall. Livia looked at them in fright. So you do believe that Rufus is guilty? She asked anxiously. Publius looked down at the floor, and the other boys also avoided meeting Livia's eyes. You cannot believe that, Livia said firmly. My son swore that he did not do it, and he has never lied to me. But her confidence was wavering, for she turned to one of her slave girls and asked, when did Rufus come home last night? I don't know, the girl said. But Rufus must know, mistress. Did Rufus bring Rufus home from school last night? Livia asked the boys. Rufus had already left, Mucius said. Rufus hurried home, hoping to meet Rufus on the way. I have not spoken to Rufus about this, Livia said. Unfortunately, he is not here now. I was unwell this morning, and Rufus was sent to the doctor to fetch healing herbs for me. The doctor lives on the other side of the Tiber River, so that Rufus will not be back for 3 hours at least. We can only wait for him. Perhaps you will be kind enough to come back later. I need your help. I myself can do little about this. Of course, I have already sent an express courier to my husband, but the man will take at least 5 days to reach Gaul, assuming that he can find enough changes of horses along the way. 10 days there and back at best. And meanwhile, what terrible things may happen. We must find the real culprit as soon as possible, and you can help me. You won't desert Rufus, will you? The boys assented heartily, but they were secretly wondering in what way they could help Livia. For by now, they were almost certain that Rufus was guilty. Livia, however, clung to a last hope. Rufus could not have come home late last night, she said. Otherwise, Rufus would have told me. The boys did not understand. You told me that the desecration of the temple could have taken place only between the 5th and the 6th hours of the night, didn't you? She asked. Yes, Julius said. The policemen swore that they saw nothing before the 5th hour. Lambo, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. The mailman. You know, we don't like the mailman. It's okay. It's okay. Let's see, where were we? You need to be quiet. I'm reading. Yeah, I know. I know. Come here. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I know. Your neighbor friends. Here's the mailman too. Sorry, so sorry. All right, here we go. You told me that the desecration of the temple could have taken place only between the 5th and the 6th hours of the night, didn't you? She asked. Yes, Julius said. The policemen swore that they saw nothing before the 5th hour, And by the time we discovered the writing in the morning, the paint was already dry, which means it had to have been put on that wall not much later than the 5th hour of the night. That would mean that Rufus would have had to have left the house last night, Livia continued. And that is impossible. The door is locked and it is guarded. He could not crawl through the windows because they are much too small and the garden wall is too high to climb over. Once again, the boys were taken aback. From their own experience, they knew there was no chance of getting out of their own houses unnoticed late at night. Perhaps Rafa secretly let him out, Julius suggested. No, Livia said firmly. This is out of the question. I trust Rafa completely. He is utterly loyal to us. We could not have a better tutor for Rufus. Rufus is more of a member of a family than a slave. My husband brought him back from Macedonia when he was still a boy, and we have raised him as if he were our own son. In fact, we intend to give him his freedom soon, and he will then be able to choose whether to stay with us or open a small shop somewhere in town. She sighed. I suppose it is best for you all to go home now. There's nothing we can do at the moment. We must wait to hear what Rufus has to say. We left our school things in Rufus's room. May we get them? Julius asked. Livia nodded. The boys hurried to Rufus's room, followed by Livia, who held the curtain aside for them so that they would have more light. The boys picked up their stuff and started to leave, but Mucius suddenly remembered his lantern, which Rufus had taken by mistake the night before. He looked around for it. Rufus's room was furnished with Spartan simplicity. Remember the Spartans in Greek? Yeah, Spartan simplicity. Along one wall stood the bed, over which hung a portrait of Rufus's father in full general's uniform. Along the other wall was a small table, a hassock, and a shelf for school books and toys. He had no wardrobe. His clothes hung from big nails. What are you looking for? Julius asked. My lantern, Mucius said. Rufus took it with him last night by mistake. It was an expensive lantern and has my name engraved on it. My family will make a fuss if they notice that I don't have it. It ought to be around here, Antonius said, peering about the room. What is it? Livia asked, coming in. I'm looking for my lantern, Mucius said, flushing. I lent it to Rufus, and I'd like to have it back. It must be among his things on the shelf, Livia said. Mucius rummaged, but found nothing on the shelf except Rufus's books and writing materials. 11 marbles, a top, several broken wooden soldiers, a small knife, a fragment of the Alexandrian glass, and a money box for savings. Publius took the money box from his hand and shook it curiously. It's empty, he said, replacing it on the shelf. Meanwhile, Antonius had crawled under the bed. He emerged with a bundle of clothing. This is all I could find, he said, in disappointment. But Livia was startled. It's most unlike Rufus to hide things under his bed, she said. He is usually so orderly. She took the clothes from Antonius and promptly examined. Why, these clothes are soaking wet. She held them up to show the boys. The clothes looked as though they had just been taken out of a tub full of water, and she had only to press them for fat drops to splatter down upon the stone floor. Why should they be wet? Livia said in wonderment. At this moment, a slave girl came rushing into the room. Rufus is already back, mistress, she said breathlessly. Already? Livia asked. Then he could not have gone to the doctor. No, mistress, the girl said. He turned back to bring you some important news. As Livia and the boys came back to the hall, Rufus, a handsome young man, came joyfully toward them with the words, I bring good news, mistress. Tell me, Livia asked eagerly, and it was evident from her expression that she was thinking of Rufus. Our master has won a great victory, Rufus reported. The latest edition of the newspaper was hung out just as I was crossing the forum. Our master has defeated the rebellious Gauls, and there is great rejoicing in the city. The boys were delighted, and the slave girls crowded around Livia, congratulating her. Now everything will be well, mistress, one of them said. Rufus will be released immediately, Mucius said happily. Rufus released? Rufus asked. In the excitement, no one had told him about Rufus's arrest. I fear not, Livia said. to Mucius, and he realized that she would rather have had news about Rufus than about her husband's victory. She started to say something more, then considered and sent the slave girls out. Rufus alone was permitted to remain. She sat down, beckoned the boys to gather around her, and said in a low voice, "The emperor is jealous of my husband, who is adored by his troops. You know that the emperor insists on being worshipped as a god, and he will not stand for any rival gods. The prefect of the city is ambitious and is now more likely than ever to mete out harsh punishment to Rufus as a way of pleasing the emperor." The boys nodded intelligently. It was an honor to be told such political secrets, but there was a certain amount of risk in it too. It was extremely dangerous to make any slighting remarks about the emperor. Flavius looked anxiously around to make sure that no one was eavesdropping. Rufus could contain himself no longer. "What has happened to Rufus, mistress?" he burst out. "Rufus is in prison," Livia said. Rufus paled. "In prison?" he breathed, horrified. Livia told him what had happened. Then she asked sternly, "Where was Rufus last night? Why are his clothes soaking wet?" Rufus fell to his knees before her, stammering, "Oh, mistress, it is all my fault. I should have stopped the boy." "So he was out after all?" he murmured. "Where did he go? How? When did he slip out?" Rufus looked penitently at his mistress. "Rufus had already left school last night when I went to fetch him," he said. "These young gentlemen told me he had not felt well and had gone home." "We only said that because we didn't want to tell on Rufus. About Xanthippus, I mean," Flavius said. "I hurried home," Rufus continued, "but Rufus was not back yet. He arrived half an hour later." "Why did you fail to come and tell me?" Livia asked. "You were ill, mistress. There were strict orders not to disturb you," Rufus replied. "But why did he come so late?" Livia asked. "He would not explain, mistress," Rufus said. "He looked very downcast, did not answer my questions, and went straight to his room. I was worried by this behavior and watched him through an opening in the curtain. I wondered why he did not take off his cloak, for his supper was standing ready for him. He took tinder and flint and lit his lantern. When he did so, I noticed that it was not his own." "It was mine," Mucius put in. "Then he emptied his money box," Rufus continued, pouring the money into a small bag. "It occurred to me that he intended to run away, but I did not stop him immediately because I was curious to see how he would go about it. I decided it would be useful to learn his tricks, so I hid myself. That was a piece of stupidity on my part. I should never have let him out of his room. He came out and sneaked through the hall into the garden. I followed close behind. In the garden, he raced across the lawn toward the boxwood hedge, jumped over it, and suddenly disappeared. At that, I really began to worry. I ran after him, but it was already too late. I was alarmed to find a hole in the wall that we never knew anything about because it is overgrown with ivy on the outside and concealed by the hedge on the inside. The hole was too small for me to squeeze through. All I could do was stick my head through and shout after him, 'Stop! Stop! Rufus, come back at once!' But he paid no attention to me and continued on into the woods. 'Boys!' They're wrestling behind the couch. 'Boys, come here. Hey, you. Come over here. Sit. Lay down here. Lay down. Lambo. Finny, lay down. Oh my goodness. Lay down. You're making too much noise.' I had to run all the way through the house to the entrance and have Titus open the door for me. I lost so much time that Rufus was out of sight before I started after him. I searched for hours, but could not find him anywhere." "When did he return?" Livia asked. "He was gone all night," Rufus replied guiltily. "All night?" the boys and Livia exclaimed in one breath. "He only returned home this morning, shortly after sunrise," Rufus said. "Where had he been?" Livia asked anxiously. "He refused to tell me," Rufus replied. "He looked utterly worn out, was no longer wearing his cloak, and had not brought back his money or the lantern. What worried me most of all was that he was soaked to the skin. I insisted on his telling me where he had been, but he refused to even speak. Finally, I threatened to go to you, mistress, whereupon he became very excited, grasped my arms and cried out, "Oh, if you do, my father will be lost." "What in the world did he mean by that?" Livia asked. "That I don't know, mistress," Rufus replied, "but his despair seemed so genuine that I believed him. 'You must not betray me,' he pleaded. 'Nobody must know where I have been, not even my mother. It would bring misfortune upon us all,' he begged, so hard that I finally gave him my word I would not tell. If I had only guessed these dreadful consequences, mistress, I certainly would have gone to you. Perhaps we would have been able to save him. I could have helped him to escape in time. We could have gone to the country together and hidden." Rufus fell silent. He sat and stared woefully into space. "It is too late for that now," Livia said. "I ought to be angry with you for neglecting your duty, but you acted in good faith. We must all work together now to help Rufus. But how many riddles there are! Above all, I can't see how my husband can be involved in this thing. If only we could find out where Rufus was last night." "We could visit Rufus in prison and ask him," Antonios proposed. Rufus shook his head gloomily. "We would not be admitted," he said. "Besides, prisoners are strictly forbidden to talk." "He must have been hiding out in Minerva Square," Publius said. "It wouldn't take him all night to write 'Caius is a dumbbell' on the wall," Julius objected. "And how do the lost cloak, the wet clothes, and the money fit in?" Mucius pondered. "Maybe he used the money to buy red paint," Flavius suggested. "Bosh," Mucius said. "After sundown, there's not a shop open in all of Rome." "Something tells me that Rufus fell in with evil companions last night," Livia remarked thoughtfully. "There is no other explanation for his behavior and for his staying away so long. Somebody forced him to write 'Caius is a dumbbell' on the sacred temple, perhaps with the intention of blackmailing my husband. Perhaps there are other political motives behind this business. If we had some proof that Rufus was forced to do that, the prefect would have to release him. We must try to find this blackmailer, or whatever he is. It seems to me that the man into whose hands Rufus fell must be the same person as the man who assaulted the teacher Xanthos," Rufus said. "These two incidents in a single night, there must be some connection." "If only there were some way to find this scoundrel," Livia murmured. "But we haven't the slightest clue to go by." "The chain!" Antonio suddenly shouted. "What chain?" Mucius asked. "The chain you have in your pocket. It belongs to the burglar, doesn't it?" "Oh, that!" Mucius murmured. He took the chain out of his pocket. Livia and Rufus examined it curiously. "A valuable chain," Rufus said. "High Oriental officers wear such chains on their cloaks." "Perhaps the robber is a Persian general," Antonio said thoughtfully. "More likely it was stolen from the cloak of a Persian general," Publius suggested. "I'm afraid this chain is not much help," Livia said. "I have an idea," Mucius exclaimed. "What is it?" the other boys asked. "Lucos," Mucius said, his voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Lucos?" "Yes," Mucius said. "He has second sight. After all, let us go to him, show him the chain, and have him say who it belongs to." Antonios was overwhelmed. "Will that be exciting?" Livia also thought the idea good. "This Lucos is supposedly really to have second sight," she commented. "I've heard the most highly placed people think so." But Julius, Publius, and Flavius maintained an embarrassed silence. "Are you scared of him?" Mucius challenged. "Go on," Publius mumbled. "Why should I be scared?" Julius asked, scratching himself behind his ear. "I'm not scared either," Flavius hastily put in. Ooh, the next chapter, snakes. See you then.